to the Bean Ninjas podcast, where you get an all-access pass to see what happens behind the closed doors of a fast-growing global bookkeeping and financial reporting business.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bean Ninjas podcast. And today on the show, we have Mandi Ellefson from the Hands Off CEO. Welcome, Mandi.
Thank you for having me, Meryl.
We always like to get started by hearing a little bit of our guest's backstory. So could you tell us a little bit about your early career and what's taken you to where you are now?
Yeah, so this is my second business. My first business was a graphic design and branding web design company. And, the breakdowns that I had in that business is what actually led me to do the consulting work I'm doing now with Hands Off CEO. So maybe I'll just give you a bit of the backstory. What led me to do this is that I was at a point in my business where I was really wanting it to run without me, and I wanted it to continue growing and running without me. And it could not do that. And I was 9 months pregnant at the moment. And the timing was pretty awful for me to have to kind of shut the business down because my husband was in this really demanding graduate medical program, and we could have really used the income, but I had to shut the business down to take maternity time, which was really important, and I'm glad I did. But I was really frustrated that I had to do that because I actually knew how to make a company run without me, because I had done this as an operations manager in the past company that I had worked for. So I had done that. I had squeezed so much profit out of this business, and I had been able to travel anytime I wanted to. And really, it was just like clockwork. But I had not been successful at doing that in my own company, and it drove me crazy that I hadn't. So at this point, after I had created a number of breakdowns that was very stressful for me right when I was about to bring a child into the world, and, I had a 4-year-old as well. There's a lot of breakdowns. I'll just spare you guys the details on that, but it really led me to investigating, what does it take to actually get a service-based business to run without you? So what I did is a lot of research, and actually in a community, that's where you and I connected. Actually, I did a lot of research in with a number of different entrepreneurs, and I started solving problems for people, basically, so that I could solve the problem for myself. So I could reverse engineer the system for how I could get the company to run without me. And I learned some things in this process. And one of them was really I understand why it didn't work for me before. And it also was exciting for me because I realized where my real key passion was. And I ended up leaving that business, passed it off to someone that I had kind of built up as a partner, sold the business to her, and she's still running it now. But I got off into my next business here, which later became the Hands Off CEO, and that's how I got to that. It was about 6 years ago, and the rest history.
And I think I've been a small part of that journey. We connected, as you said, a number of years ago in Dynamite Circle, and I have actually used your coaching services as well in helping me to scale the service business that I'm running. And so that was why I was excited, or one of the reasons I was excited to have you on the show today, was to talk through some of those strategies that you work on with your clients to help them scale your service business, or to scale their service businesses. So why don't we start with, what do you think it is about service businesses that can make them difficult to scale?
Well, what makes it difficult is that the reason why the service is successful is because how it worked is that the business owner had this skill set, and they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to hang on a shingle, start selling it, and now a business is born, right? So you have this skill set that's being sold as a service, and it's growing, but it's really dependent on the owner, because the owner was the one who created it. So that's the problem with a service. And what it looks like is solving lots of different problems for lots of different people, and in different ways. And a lot of times it's grown through referrals. And referrals are great and all, except for when they are they're not matching the kind of work that you really want to grow into. So, a real challenge with scaling a service is that it can be so bespoke, and it can require such a high level of skill to deliver it. So what ends up happening is that there is not enough money in the business to pay the business owner what they want to make, and then to pay a skilled enough worker to actually deliver the service and still keep the quality good enough, and for the owner to actually have money left over. So what it does is it keeps the business owner trapped in the business if they want to make a good amount of money.
And I've been there myself with my first business was consulting, and it was very difficult to hire someone to do custom accounting services. And that was where I moved into Bean Ninjas and bookkeeping and more of a productized service. So what would you recommend to that business owner? They're the one with that technical skill that someone wants to use. It's difficult to hire someone.
Yeah, it is.
Fill that role. What's next for them? What should they do?
Yeah. So what's next for them is to narrow in on what a common problem that they can solve. And I think that there's a mistake that I see happen a lot of times is to jump right to the most scalable solution. And for some people, that's it, and that's what they're going to do. Like with Bean Ninjas, I think it's a great example. With bookkeeping, it's a more scalable business. And I think that for the kind of industry that you're in, I think that was probably a good decision. And just based on your goals and all that as well. But I think that too often service-based businesses will say, well, you know what, I'm just going to, so they follow this reasoning. They say, okay, I want this to run without me so that I can grow the company, so that it's like more of a hands-off business, right? So they say, well, what is keeping me so hands-on in the business? Oh, well, it's the strategy. So they say, okay, well, let's strip out all the strategy then. So what that does is now they have a commoditized service, which is becoming increasingly problematic, because as we're becoming more global of an economy, you can go overseas for commodities a lot cheaper. So if you're offering a commodity in a Western country where you have to be paying Western wages, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because the commodity, it's a spiral downwards. And that's really the problem with when you're offering something that there's not a whole lot of value to. So what I suggest to do instead is to flip it and say, how can we offer this service, and we can increase the strategy in some cases, actually, but you can do it in a way where you're actually reducing the amount of time. So what I look at is what does it take for us to first? So I start at instead of saying what's the most scalable option, and that's most definitely a question that does come up, but I start with what would it take to add the most value to your clients. So you start at the very top and say, what kind of outcomes could we create? And by the way, it might not be for your current clients too. You might, and the way it is a lot of times with some clients that I've worked with is that they're not actually working with the right type of clients. And we have to just move upstream a little bit so that they can offer, they can solve bigger problems. So the best way to be able to increase value is just to, look at, instead of saying we're solving 6-figure problems, or sometimes even lower than that, which would be a problem, big problem. So look at, are we solving 6-figure problems? Are we solving $500,000 problems? Are we solving $1 million problems? And look at like how big of a problem you can solve. And, what is that going to take? What would it take to potentially guarantee that you can add on $500,000 to a company, for example, and that or $1 million or whatever it is. And that might sound a little bit scary, but it's the kind of thinking that is going to push you into really understanding how can we offer the best level of outcomes. I didn't say service, I said outcomes to the to the right people that are going to be able to really capitalize on that value. And when you do that, when you're looking at a value formula, it's pretty simple, right? You just look at, well, you know what, if you want to charge $20,000, then you need to be you need to be generating 5 to 10 times that value for them, for that $20,000. So you do the math on that, how much you need to actually be providing in value for the client. So, you need to be providing, $100,000 to $200,000 worth of value for that. So, and that's kind of on the low end. Did I get the math right?
I was too busy. You dropped a couple of value bombs there, so I was busy thinking about those.
Because I'm thinking about all the systems that I'm thinking instead of the actual math. So I do math on paper. So if I got the numbers wrong, the whole point is 5 to 10 times value for whatever you're charging.
There was a couple of points that really stood out to me there with what you were talking about. And one was where you mentioned outcomes instead of service. And I think as service business owners, we can get caught up in trying to provide a service to everyone and solve everyone's problems. Whereas when you talked about outcomes, you need to be a lot more clear about what your service, or what outcomes, or what you're actually delivering and the value that you're providing. So in this example, say I was this particular business owner, I'd gone through that exercise of identifying where I could really add value to clients. And even if they're not my existing clients, I might need to go out and find some new clients. I'm clear about, or I think I'm clear about what those outcomes would be. What would be the next step?
Right. So, after understanding, okay, there's kind of a step before that too, because it's just like, these are the outcomes that we're going to provide. And these are the outcomes we could potentially provide. And this is kind of an uncomfortable step for some business owners, by the way. So that, and is definitely something that we've gone through over and over and again in our business too. But what really helps at this point is to understand what does, like, the top 20% of the clients that I work with, looking at your case studies to help you understand how to do this. Like, instead of like averaging out the results for all of your clients, which is what most people do, and say, well, you know what kind of outcomes we can get? Well, it just kind of depends. No more of this it depends. You focus on the very best type of clients that you can get results for, and then look at, what is it going to take? What do they need to have in place? Go, and then directly go out, reach out to those type of clients that you can get a great result for, and then have a more compelling offer for how you can actually get that outcome for them. With a lot of conviction, and then you're now growing a company. You're growing your company in the direction where you can have the maximum profitability and the maximum impact.
And when you just said there, what the clients need to have in place in order for you to have those outcomes, could you give some examples of that? I think that's quite important, because sometimes clients you won't be able to deliver value because there's something lacking in their business.
Yeah, I'll use the example of an agency. So for an agency to be able to generate, like, let's say, be able to add $1 million to the company they're working with. So the company they're working with, they're going to have capacity for $100,000 more. For $1 million more of business. They have to have the capacity. They have to be able to scale that, right? They have to, if you're generating leads for them, for example, they might have to have a functioning sales team of some kind other than the CEO. That you might need to have that in place to do that. You might need to have in place, you might also need to understand, do you actually like working with this company? Is this a company that is doing good in the world that you want to help scale? So those are some examples, and you might have like 10 or 15 things, but the problem I think that a lot of people run into, is that they don't actually think through what they need to have in place in order to know with certainty that they can get great results. And if you know what you need to have in place, then sales becomes just a game of quantifying and qualifying. You're just quantifying what type of quantifying how much pain they're in, how much is actually costing them, and qualifying, can you actually get them a result, and do you want to? So so it becomes so much easier when you understand with certainty that you can provide a certain outcome for a client. And then you will show up so much more confident for your sales conversations. And it's a matter of you qualifying whether they are a great fit for you, adding $1 million to their business in 12 months, for example.
There's some great examples. And so I can imagine that some business owners would feel like they want to take these steps. They want to really understand the value that they're providing, maybe even change the type of clients that they're working with. But their challenge is they're already working 50, 60 hours a week. And they're wondering, well, how are they going to free up their time so they can actually focus on activities like this, which are really important in scaling their business?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And this is something that I discovered pretty early on when I started consulting that I had this great offer for people. I'll help you systematize your business. I'll help you, all this great stuff. That was the earlier offer. That's my offer now is much better than that. But that was where we started, right? And people would say no to me, even though they really wanted to do it. They were excited about it. But the reason why is because Mandi, that sounds great and all, but I'm already working 60 hours a week. What am I supposed to do? I'd have no more time to work on this. So I very quickly realized that I needed to solve that problem for them if I was to be successful at all in my business. So I developed what this system that I call Find Time Now system, and it helps you find 10 or more extra hours per week, and you use that to actually grow the business. So I like all my clients to be spending that time on growth related tasks, not just freeing it up to, unless they're already if you're already working 60, 70 hours a week, maybe you're actually using that time, to be working less and just be a lot more productive. So, so there's some ways that you can do that. And if you're interested, we could actually talk more about how to actually free up that time.
So absolutely. Let's do that. I know I have a personal interest in productivity and time management, but I know that some of our listeners would as well. And I just wanted to point out, I think you've just given a great example of how you solved the problem. You were selling coaching where people could scale their business, but they couldn't get results if they didn't have the time to actually implement what you were talking about. And so you created another product so that they could then get value. So I think you've given a great example of how you've done that in your own business as well.
Yeah. And I'm glad you pointed it out, because actually that is a really great way that you can look at your prospective client's biggest objection to working with you and find a way to solve that. And then you will remove a lot of the resistance to clients moving forward with you. So what's really been interesting is that this was a hard thing for me to do the Find Time Now. I did a lot of testing for this, and it was personally very difficult for me because I have ADD, and I haven't been diagnosed with it, but I'm certain I've got it. And I've had a difficult time managing time. I literally don't feel time passing in the same way other people do. So time management has always been a struggle for me, and over the years I've developed some really great systems around it. But I didn't know how I was going to solve this for clients in such a quick way. So anyway, what I have discovered is a system that works it works for every client that I've ever worked with on this. In fact, I guarantee it now. It's become one of the biggest things that draw people in to want to work with me is that, and it's a qualifier too, because that they know that 10 hours extra a week, they know that that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to their business. For a less mature business owner, they don't realize the value of their time yet, and they might not even see the value of that. So it's a qualifier too, which is kind of interesting. So let me just kind of share what the generalizations I've found with this. So there's 4 different things, and then plus the power hour we'll talk about. So what you want to do is do some time tracking, which is really fun, right? It's not. And track your time in 15-minute increments, and to really, what it does is it creates some painful awareness, and I call it the reality check. And do this for a few days and get really clear on how you're actually spending your time. And then I walk clients through a process for looking at, what can we eliminate? What can we consolidate? like batch, do it all at once? What can we automate? So like with software or just a process, like templates or things like that. And what can we delegate? And notice that I said delegate last, because you don't want to delegate something that should be eliminated. So now doing that, walking through that process, what it's going to do is there's going to be all sorts of ideas for what you can eliminate, consolidate, automate, and delegate. There's going to be tons of ideas for it, but you don't need to implement all of them. You only need to implement like 1 or 2. And that will be plenty to get you 10 extra hours per week. If you have a more established company, if you're like a startup, you're starting brand new, and I know most of your audience aren't, they're probably further along. But if you're a startup, you might really not even get it. But if you have an established business, like this thing works like nothing else. It's really pretty impressive. So you're going to find all these opportunities, and you're just going to be looking at, okay, what's the most painful, or what's the biggest energy drain? What's the biggest time suck? And the energy drain, so like, this isn't just about managing your time, but it's about managing your energy. And it's so important as a CEO to be able to manage your energy, because it's not necessarily about the amount of time that it takes you to like answer a bunch of dumb little emails, because it might only take like 5 minutes to answer some of those things, and it adds up to accumulation of maybe an hour a week. But the time drain of how it drains your energy when you're jumping back and forth with some of these tasks, and it just wears you out, and it makes every hour that your work significantly less effective. So that's why it's important to looking at what are the things that are draining you the most. You remove those, and then you're going to be able to be much more effective with every hour. So that's how I look at it and prioritize.
I like that you've talked. Oh, sorry, you sound like
no. Go for it. Go for it.
I was just going to point out, I like that you've talked about energy there as well as time, because every hour isn't equal. You could produce amazing work in 2 hours, and then 5 hours when you're not feeling motivated, or you haven't managed your energy levels to be at your peak performance, the output might be less in those 5 hours. I think you've made an important distinction there.
Yeah. And the other part of it is that I've personally experienced this too, where when you run into some capacity issues, sometimes it's not even a time capacity. It's an actual like bandwidth, like brain capacity, and you just can't add anymore. And really what that is it's from an accumulation of energy drains, and doing things that you shouldn't be doing that your team should be handling, or doing things that you shouldn't be doing at all, like maybe excessive meetings, or filling requests that people ask you to do that you shouldn't be doing in the first place. You should just say no.
And you've mentioned teams there, and I'd like to move the conversation into managing staff. I know you've got some really great tips around that. And also that one of the main or major frustrations for service-based business owners is around building their team and being able to trust that their team members can do great work, and having the right people in the right seats doing what's required to scale the business. So what are your main tips, or how do you work with clients around building their teams?
Yeah. It's a big question. So I'm trying to think of the best way to go about it. And I was just kind of thinking about a breakthrough that a client had on just over the past, like just recently with his team. And there were some serious breakdowns. Like anyway, he was sharing this, but it makes me think about it, because he was just sharing this today in our leadership activation session. And of course I'm not going to say who it was, but this is a call with our whole tribe where people are going to share their breakthroughs and share their breakdowns and get feedback on, is this the right business name for a rebrand? And, how should I handle this type of situation? So like when you're dealing with staff like this, you're really in a different place in your leadership, and having some support around you and like some sounding board, I find to be incredibly useful. And this is something that I always have for myself, is people I can reach out to when you got a people problem and you don't quite know how to solve it, because you can go and ask another perspective and be able to handle it a lot better than if you just would have reacted and wanted to maybe reach out and strangle the person if they were doing something crazy. Which is actually coincidentally what he wanted to do when it first happened. So I first had a conversation with him, and he was really frustrated to the point where he's just like, maybe I should just sell this business. I'm so sick of it, and you just kind of need to vent the frustration sometimes. But, what he really found, and it was a real breakthrough, was actually his, what he called, which I thought was fantastic, is stepping back to create space for his team to step up, to step into their role and I thought that was a great way of putting it. So, and you need some things in place for that, right? Because you don't want to just like be irresponsible with being hands off in your company, right? You still need to manage your company. You still need to manage people, but really, maybe managing is the wrong word. It's more like you need to lead. And so what I think is a great way to do this is you first need to understand, what is the vision for this company? What are really we here to do? What do we stand for? What are our values? And really understanding this. And you know what? I think that people hear this and it's being mentioned a lot, but it's like, I heard all this, but I just need to grow sales. But I'm just going to say you're not getting it. You're not getting it because you need to understand where you're going and what you're creating to really understand if the people that you have on board are actually aligned with that. And for you to get the best results with your team, you need to have a standard, an agreement of sorts for you to hold your team to. And that mission, the vision, core values, those are what I hold my team to. And if they do not follow that, it's grounds for being dismissed from the team. That's the way I see it. But when you're seeing things on your team that you don't like, then it's an opportunity for you to raise the bar, raise the standard. And this is this gentleman I was mentioning, the CEO, had this is what he actually did, where he saw wasn't what he did not want to see, and said, you know what, you guys need to step up. This is what I expect. This is what we're doing. And it was an opportunity, and it's gutsy, because setting the standard like that is also setting the standard for it's setting up a situation for people to either step up or step out. So it's uncomfortable, and this is why a lot of CEOs they avoid some of these potentially confronting type of situations. That is the very thing that they need to actually grow the company. So you need to set the standard and then communicate the standard. So you're raising the bar, and then people are either going to meet the bar or they're going to not meet the bar. And if they don't meet the bar, a lot of times they self-select out and they leave the company. So anytime when you're like, okay, we're really moving in this direction, and people some of them will not actually be following along with the company, and that's fine, because now you know. So it leaves a void for you to fill with people who are on board. So those are some general musings on how to get better results from your team. It really generally how to shift the whole culture so that you can have this space for rapid growth and to do it in a meaningful way where you're actually growing a company in the direction that's going to make the biggest impact in your market.
Yeah, great answer. So if we step back to the original example we were talking through of when you first start working with someone, and then the next stage around, so first of all, they're looking at the value that they're providing, they're looking at whether they're working with the right clients, and they free up some time to work on the business. Where does working on their team fit in with this process? Would that be the next stage after they've freed up their time and they've got clearer about what the vision is? Or is there another step in there before they then start to look at their team and whether they've got the right people in the right seats?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think you're always working on your team. It's unavoidable. And there's different stages that you're working with them to in the succession forward in your business. So maybe I'll just kind of talk about those stages first and then work into like where the steps go into, just so you can kind of see the progression and understand how it fits in. So, the progression is that you go from solo. Well, I'll just start at the bottom just so you can see the full progression to, okay, I've got a lot of work. Let's hire like some kind of personal assistant or hire a like doers in the business. So like, let's take the agency example again. And they're bringing on maybe a person to do SEO. They're bringing on designers to do the design work. So they're bringing on people piecemeal. And that's great and all until you start your job turns into playing monkey in the middle, and you're just like managing all these people, and it's kind of, and they're working part-time, so you can't quite manage them. And these contractors who are not fully committed to the business in the same way as if they were fully committed to the business full-time or an employee. But you're kind of playing monkey in the middle here. So that is a stage. A lot of times clients, they might have, they're a little further than that. A lot of times when I work with them, but then they're also further along too, where they have a complete team and even an executive team in place too. So, okay. So anyway, there's these stages, right? Where you have your team. And when you're in that monkey in the middle stage, and actually further along too, but what you really need to do to build out your service and really understand who you're doing what for, right? And what, as you're filtering through and really understanding the best ways to scale the company, to add more profit, and to really be maximizing every hour in your business, what you're going to be looking at is, okay, I want to make sure I'm not repeating myself here, but looking at what the 80-20 is in your service. So, what is the 20% that's custom? What is the 80% that's process driven? So, the 80% that's process driven is your hands work. It's like designers, doers, it's your hands work. And then then the strategic work is, your brains work. Now, as a service business grows, the brains work is going to be done by the CEO for a while. And at stage one, there's 4 different stages of being a hands-off CEO, by the way. And stage one, it's like 80% is the process-driven work that you get off your plate. 20% the work you're doing. So you're working on quality control. You're working on the strategic work. And, you're doing and probably planning out the projects of the work and everything too. So that's the part that you're leading and directing it. And then you're all the hands work you're delegating. So that's like stage one, which is an awesome place to be. Even better is when you get to stage 2, where you are there's 95% of the work done by, your team, and you're just doing 5%. So there's a place there where you start stepping out of the strategy work. But hear how I have taken a service and we've stripped down, we've divided it into the process work, which can be done by hands, or cheaper hands, and can be a lot more streamlined. And then the strategic work, which need to be done by brains. So typically the way service-based businesses work is that they have like brains that do all of it, which is expensive. So and someone who is as skilled as a brains worker as you are, as the owner, they're going to want almost as much as you do, right? So they're expensive, and you can't quite make very much money after you've paid them. So what you need to do is you need to be understanding, putting right people in the right place by understanding who are our brains and who are our hands, and then building out the roles in your organization that way. And it's one of the things is it's a great cost benefit for the company, but also it allows you to optimize the capacity of your very best team members, so that you can actually continue growing the company without hiring more people.
Wouldn't that be great?
That's what scaling is all about, right? Yes. I've read some of your articles on this, and I think they were spot on about scaling is really about growing without adding more people.
Yes, absolutely. So growing the top line revenue, but keeping a team small so there's not as many managers required as if you were to add more people, and then also just adding more to the bottom line. Yeah, it's a passion of mine. I enjoy scaling and systems as well as the accounting and marketing side of things.
Yeah, I've loved the articles that that you put out on your blog.
Thanks. So another challenge that business owners will often have is the thought that so ideally we've talked about being able to grow top line revenue and potentially not needing to add team members. But at some point in some stages of business, we will need to add an additional team member, and it can be really difficult finding the cash flow to do that. But if a client came to you and they felt like they did need to add an extra brains in the business, so someone highly skilled, what kind of process would you work through with them to work out whether they do actually need that person? And then if they do, how they're going to fund that?
Right. So yeah, this is step 3 in my program. There's 2 different parts of it. First of it is building out a client success map around a specific service product. So, really understanding what's the one problem you solve for one, particular client in one way. So, building a good, compelling offer around that and then selling it. That's like the first part of step 3 was scale your service. And then the other part of it is really understanding, okay, how are we going to deliver that and who do we need to have in place? And you're building out that org chart for what it looks like for you to do that. And yeah, oftentimes it is hiring another person to, but this especially the case is when the thing that I see a lot, one of the biggest reasons why people come to me is because they have capacity issues and they're like, they have moved into the stage of their company where sales is no longer a problem and they just can't fulfill. And it's on the surface, it's a great problem to have. It's a very high quality problem, but it's also very stressful. And, it's a hard place to be in. And the other challenges is that there's a lot of business owners that don't quite understand it. So it can feel a little bit lonely too, because I think a lot of business owners actually struggle making sales. But when you have developed such a great service that you are, well, so first of all, I guess we should go back too, because here's the thing: is some people have capacity issues, and it's not necessarily. The problem is that they're not charging enough. So they're just bringing all this work and it's not very profitable. So they need to charge more. So what you need to do is to get cash flow to hire the people to do it. First of all, you need to leverage and really understand, okay, how can we maximize the profit for each project that we do? So there's 2 ways to do that. One of them is to cut. Always looking at ways to cut and save money. But my favorite way is actually to look at top line. So how can we provide a bigger outcome by solving a bigger problem? And when you provide more value, then you can increase your fees. So just looking at that equation, like I was mentioning before, of 5 times, you can charge your fees. If you can deliver 5 to 10x the ROI for your services, then you can charge that. So it's looking at, what is it going to take to double our fees? What is it going to take? Like, what kind of outcomes do we need to provide? Now, when you do that and you confidently, you bring in business that is more profitable. So every dollar you add to the service you're doing right now is pure profit. So the easiest way to make more money to actually be able to hire the team that you want, and a good team. I mean, one of the things that I was reading from Brian Tracy says that if you pay peanuts, you'll get monkeys. So, so understanding that when you're investing in an employee or a contractor, whatever the staff structure you want to be doing, is that if you get someone good, they will pay for themselves. So they're basically free. So that's one way to look at it. But to actually get the cash flow in, the easiest way to do is to increase your fees by increasing the value. So that's probably my biggest recommendation.
Yeah. Increase fees and increase value. Yeah.
Right. And the other part too is just like looking at what stage of growth that you're in, because if you really have capacity issues because you can sell like no other, and you just simply need to deliver the work, invest ahead. That's a reasonable time to invest ahead in your growth. If you can map it out and say, you know what, like this role is keeping us from bringing on 4 clients, like it's asinine to wait to even until you get that person in. I guess if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. And so did you say, were there 4 stages of business? I think you've talked about 3. Is that?
Yeah. And I've used different, I've talked about some different numbers, which might be confusing. There's 5 stages to my scale system. They're not stages. There's 5 steps in my Scale to Freedom process. And, that kind of coincide with them. Not exactly perfectly, but those 5 steps are how to get to scale a service business and make it run without you. There's 5 main steps for how to do that. And we talked about Find Time Now, which is one. And part of that too is an assessment that I do with like a scalability assessment to really understand what is it going to take. What are the 4 main things that you need to do in the next year to be able to scale your business? Sometimes it's whatever the goal is that you're looking at. And then, step 2 is around really putting in place a good plan. Step 3 is around, scaling your service. So looking at those 2 different parts we talked about, which is really building a client success map that you can sell, that you can, potentially double or more your fees. And then the other step that, step B of 3B, is now how do you deliver that? How do you deliver that in the most profitable way? And then the 4 is like your people plan that we kind of talked about how to break it down and really understand which people are. And then step 5 is really like going hands off. And that's kind of like ninja moves. And, my clients usually get to that. Some of them get to it in as little as 6 months. Some of them get to it maybe even a couple years. It just kind of depends on, what their goals are. But I want all of my clients within, 6 to 12 months to be able to leave their business for at least a week, if not more. So, those are like the 5 steps to scale your business. But there's like 4 stages. Does that make sense before I jump in?
It does. So the 4 stages of business are more about where you're at as a business owner, whether it's just you or whether you've got a team and everyone reporting to you, like monkey in the middle, as you said. And so the 3rd and 4th stage there. Could you just recap on those?
Sure. Because I didn't talk about the 3rd and 4th. So the stages, I'll recap that. So the stages of the hands-off CEO growth, they're specific stages. And the first stage there is, like I mentioned, the 20% strategic, the owners in 20%, and then the team's delivering 80%. That's the build to grow stage. And then the next stage is all about building capacity. So and you build capacity by getting the owner out and building a replicatable system. So it's getting 90% out of the service delivery, because we're not building just a system for like the hands work. Building a system for the hands work is actually not that difficult. What's really difficult is how do we build a system for the 20%, the strategic work. And that's the magic that is missing from virtually all service-based businesses, which is why they can't scale. So, that's really that's magic is happening in, stage 2, which is you look when capacity for growth. So 5% the CEO is doing, 95% the rest of the team is doing. And then stage 3 is really about getting out of, marketing. It's about delegating marketing and, some of sales, some of the sales admin more. So that stage 4 is really about you delegating out, really fine tuning your marketing systems so that it can be generating leads without you. That part being hands off, that's really about 4. And step 5 is really about getting the sales. And for some people, some companies might actually be flipping this a little bit, especially if your company has lower ticket sales, you might actually have salespeople earlier than you delegate out the marketing, for example. But for higher ticket, services oftentimes is the owner that's continuing to do the sales on the high end side. And if you can do it sooner than that, by all means, great. But I find that is one of the most difficult things to delegate out for high ticket services. So it's one of the last things to actually delegate for the business to actually grow without the owner. So step 4 is about the company running without the owner, so it can run without the owner. And step 4 is really about the ability to grow without the owner. Does that make sense?
It does. So that final step, so step 4, if you've completed that step, then you could step away and take holidays and the business can continue to run effectively. Whereas step 5 is actually having a team in place that can grow the business when you're not there. And I think that would be many of the listeners' goals, would to be sitting somewhere on the typical sitting on the beach, but actually have a team behind you that can continue to grow and to think of strategy and create marketing campaigns. Wonderful. Mandi, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're almost out of time. You've shared so much value. Did you have any final words, or if someone had to pick just a couple of key points that you've talked about, or a little recap, did you have any final comments that you wanted to add?
Sure. The biggest thing is to profitably scale a service. You need to look at what is the way that we can add the maximum value and the biggest outcomes for which type of clients, being really clear on that. And when you're really clear on that, then you can increase your fees and provide a lot more profit to your business. And that is the key foundation to be able to then look at how can we break this down and systematize it so that it actually can run without me. But you don't want to strip all of that value out first. You really want to look at how can we maximize the value, and then how do we systematize it? That's probably the biggest thing I'd like people to take away from how to scale up a profitable service-based business.
And lastly, where is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So if you want to go to handsoffceo.com, you can, and /roadmap, you can download my 5-step roadmap. Like the 5 steps I share, I go into a lot more detail, and I actually go into specifically how to actually find 10 extra hours in your business. It's actually in there. It's like a video that I've gone over, and there's one key thing around the power hour that I didn't have a chance to share. So if you go there, that one key tweak will actually free up at least 5 to 10 hours per week, productive hours. So that's pretty fun. So if you can download that 5-step roadmap at handsoffceo.com sorry, I'm running out of water here. I've been talking all day long, so I'll let you repeat that link.
So it's the handsoffceo.com, and then it was /roadmap.
Thanks for that, Meryl. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks again, Mandi, and we'll talk again soon.
It was my pleasure, Meryl.